Hello, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Let me get myself a little bit of a better altitude here. I apologize for the dog that's barking in the background. That might happen for the first minute. I'm so sorry.
No
There's a lot going on here
worries.
at the moment. Hello.
I'm just so glad this is working.
I'm so grateful. Thank you very much.
Oh, no, thank you. So here we are. This is awesome.
Thank you so much.
So you said your dog is going to be barking for the first minute. Is he?
I'm afraid so. It's a long story, but yes, there may be some barking in the very first minute. So we can just talk for a moment if you like before that's completed, or
It
we.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Is it a matter of the barbiturates kicking in for the dog, or?
I wish it was. I don't. There's not enough barbiturates for me with this dog. No, we have some workmen in the house right now in the apartment, and they'll be leaving in a few minutes. But they may be passing by this door. I'm in the basement. I thought this would be the quietest place, but so there may be some. There may be a little sound effects, but it'll be done within minutes. I promise.
We'll take it all as part of the experience, you know?
You're very kind. Thank you.
Absolutely. So welcome to Deep Dives in Extraordinary Times, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, extraordinary times, crazy times. How is your life going these days?
Well, it's that's an interesting question, and it's very rare. You have a question you can ask almost anyone in the world,
I know.
and it pertains to the same subject. So, it's strange. The internet was supposed to bring us closer together, but the plague is finally doing it in many ways.
Mm.
My life is relatively blessed. Thank you for asking. I am very fortunate. We have stayed in New York City through the entire duration. When this began for us, um, March 12 was my son's birthday, his eighth birthday, and it was his last day in school for his birthday.
Mm.
It was my last day broadcasting my radio show from my studio in Midtown Manhattan.
Mm.
And after that day, everything locked down.
Yeah.
And in New York, it was ambulance sirens all day and all night. We were soon the epicenter of the world in terms of cases, in terms of deaths. It was very scary. It has been very scary. I have not gotten sick. I have known friends who have gotten sick and have been very sick and recovered. I've known people who have died. A lot of friends' parents have died. As a political comedian and someone who does political broadcasting, it's been a very intense time here. You can imagine. We are already a nation so traumatized over the past few years. For me, the experience that best describes what it was like for me. I've been making short films during this. I had 3 comedy tours planned, and they were all canceled.
Yeah.
So most of my income for the year, poof. And one of my tours, we're doing pay-per-view specials, and I've been shooting videos of me doing stand-up on the streets of New York City. First empty, then way too crowded. And I was downtown in Manhattan filming a mural, biking very slowly, and I was hit by a van.
Oh,
I woke up in an ambulance in a neck brace. This was in July.
no way.
Yeah. The woman I shoot with fortunately locked up our bikes and called 911 and talked to the witnesses. Um, I've never had that kind of experience before. So I woke up in the ambulance. I knew I was okay, and I was terrified because the one place you don't want to go is a New York City emergency room. That's what they told us for months. If you're in labor, if you have a gunshot wound, if your appendix bursts, just don't go to a New York City. The least safe place. It's just a
Right, right.
germ haven. And I began trying to, and I was very dazed. My helmet was destroyed. My bike helmet was cracked. I was okay, but they were taking me to the emergency room, and I began pleading with the EMTs to not take me
Mm.
because you don't want to go there. And I said,
Right, right.
gentlemen, I can move all my extremities. And I thought, if I say extremities, they'll think, oh, he's verbose, let him go. They said, sir, you have to go to the ER. I was mortified. I was wheeled in. They gave me another COVID test, the up the nose, but
Right,
in a
right.
neck brace. That was fun. And what was amazing about it was, and the reason I tell the story was, when they finally got me to the emergency room itself, it was empty. It was empty. I mean, not completely empty, but the section where they put us, there were no people at all.
The scare
And
tactics were working.
well, no, no, yeah, it worked. I mean, like
Ah,
there were trailers, ice trailers parked outside all the hospitals for the overflow of bodies for months. But by July, I saw what a flattened curve looks like. It looks
right.
like an empty emergency room because the people of my city who do not have a president,
Mm,
who do not have any national leadership, we have the leader of the response is also the leader of the resistance to the medical response in our country.
mm.
And I saw what happens when people sacrifice, look out for each other, wear masks, wash their hands, social distance, stay home, take the economic hit. Um, so even though now we're beginning to hit the second wave, I cannot tell you how it restored so much of my faith and it gave me so much hope as to what people can do together, even in the absence of leadership during a crisis like this.
I hear you. I left for
A very
Denmark.
long-winded answer, sorry.
Well, no, I appreciate that because, you know, we left for Denmark in July. We were in California. The wave
Hmm.
was starting. The second wave was starting in California at that time. And same story. We make money from music.
Yeah,
None of that going on, right?
yeah,
So, and then it was a matter of getting that into our heads that this is not going to change anytime quickly, but there are places on this earth where people have bonded together, have banded together, have listened to science, and
yes,
have actually managed to make this thing work so that people can be living their lives. And by the time we got to Denmark in mid-July, there was very little. I mean, there was something like between 10 and 50 cases per day in the entire country. And people could go about their lives. Now,
it's
Denmark
amazing.
is cold and it's you know, we're having a bit of a wave here again.
But everyone has health care. No one's afraid to go to a doctor because they're not afraid they can't pay.
Right. And the death rate here compared to US is 1/6 of what
Yes,
we've seen in the US, right? Because
amazing.
of that.
Yeah,
And because people generally, it's so funny, today was the day that the government had mandated that everybody should wear masks in public places, all public places. Before it was just in public transport because the infection rates were not that high. But today, Thursday, the 29th of October, everybody was supposed to wear masks in the grocery stores. And I got in the grocery store, everybody was wearing masks. Yesterday, there were a few. Today, everybody was wearing it because today was the day it was supposed to start, right? So there's this sense of we live together, we do not more than what's required, but we do what's required and we don't have an attitude about it. And
yes.
it feels so different.
Hmm. Yeah, we're hoping that in the States we will have a national mask mandate in late January of 2021.
Oh my
We're,
gosh.
op- we're optimistic that we'll have a mask mandate on January 21st.
You know,
America's not fond of doing things we know work. You know, we
it,
know the things that work and the things that don't work. And consistently, we have leaders in this country who just want to keep on doing the things that we know don't work because it's more convenient or more enriching to their donors.
I've been thinking about it, you know, because one of the things that I see again and again is this rebelliousness, this love of rebellion interpreted as if we go against the system, if we go against what actually is the common good, then we're
Yeah.
rebellious and then we're free.
Yeah. But again, it's not really rebellion. They're not rebelling against the system. They're rebelling against science, against facts,
Right.
against empirical data. You know, the same people who claim they're pro-life, right?
Right.
But they reject the science on wearing masks, and they reject the science on climate change. And these two things are completely connected. You know, they're not actually pro-life. They don't really care about unborn people. I mean, if you don't care about climate science, you don't care about the unborn. And yet, you know, there's every president this country's ever had has appealed to the better angels of our nature.
Mm.
Even our worst presidents have talked about how good we are as a people. This is the first time we've had a president who said, you know what, folks, I'm a big, fat, lying, corrupt, racist pig, and that's just fine, and you're perfect as you are. And it's this culture of moral convenience and, civic sloth that just says whatever's most convenient, whatever feels good works. This is really, I've never seen a presidency so based on emotion and beyond reason. Reason doesn't work. Logic doesn't work. Facts don't work. Hypocrisy, quoting the Bible, quoting the Constitution, quoting what the president said a week ago doesn't work. It's all about emotion. It's all about the illusion of winning or happiness. It's all about the release of dopamine in the brain, that where pleasure is misconstrued as true happiness, and we're paying a big price for it. It's like secondhand smoke. It's not enough to say, oh, we'll let the smokers ruin their own lives. It's fine. They're smokers. They know the risk. They want to kill themselves. Great. No, they're secondhand smoke. There are other victims than the person who is foolishly hurting themselves.
But
And
but
that's what this is. This
but
is secondhand, just saying let the idiots not wear masks and get sick. That's irresponsible morally, and it doesn't do anything for the other folks who are innocent.
but it's emotional, and it's a matter of immediate gratification, obviously.
Yes, I think so.
But it's not about long term. It's a very short term strategy. There's
That's
absolutely
America.
no long term thinking there. And how this is what I can't, as a Danish person, I can't wrap my mind around how this is freedom.
It's not freedom. It's not. It's anti-intellectualism. It is. John Kenneth Galbraith said in the late 1960s, the modern conservative is engaged in one of mankind's oldest pursuits, the search to find a virtuous justification for selfishness. And it's a cult of selfishness. A real religion is where the Savior dies for you. A cult is where the Savior asks you to die for them. But this is all about convenience. It's all about the moral convenience. It's all about not acknowledging racism, not acknowledging police brutality, not acknowledging poverty, not acknowledging the science of climate, even though we're dealing with the effects, not acknowledging the fact that America's really good at, we don't prevent things here. We fight symptoms. We don't prevent poverty. We fight crime. We don't prevent terrorism. We fight terrorists. We don't prevent disease. We treat symptoms. We don't prevent unwanted pregnancies. We fight each other over abortion. We're not very good at planning ahead. And generally, the politician who promises people the most convenience is usually the one who wins when there's a low turnout. That's going to be different this time. We're witnessing a really different period in American history where the guy who's not BSing you that it's all going to be okay has a considerable lead. But
And let's hope that voter suppression and whatever else does not interfere, or the Supreme Court or whatever things might come in the way.
Cheating on many levels this year. There's so many levels of cheating in this election. It's unreal.
And it's interesting because the one who has talked the most about, fraud is obviously the side that is wishing to engage in it and suppress votes, and has a long history of doing so.
Yes.
Tied to all kinds of mainly racist, but also certainly a view of, we can't have poor people get influence because that could cost us tax dollars.
Yes.
So
you're exactly right. It's all about depressing the vote. It's all about how do you discourage voting, because when there is high voter turnout, the status quo is always most affected. When there's low voter turnout, the status quo always benefits. And I've seen this my whole life. I remember when I was very young, President Bush Sr. vetoed something called the motor voter bill, which would automatically register every American to vote as soon as they got their driver's license. And Bush vetoed it, saying, it's a free country, you can't force people to vote. And it wasn't doing that. It was just getting them registered so they could vote if they wanted to. But they make it hard to, there's places in this country where you can vote with a National Rifle Association ID card,
I know,
but not a university ID card.
I know.
They gerrymandering, redistricting, obviously voter ID laws, where you have to, have a ID to vote when there's no voter fraud in this country, nothing in the Constitution about that. It's all been designed, long before I was born, to make sure democracy was including as few people as possible, and that was the origin of this country. The rich white males who thought only rich white males should have the vote, and every right ever since then has been fought for by people, not handed out by government.
So something shifted with, the way I see it, Eisenhower was a different kind of Republican, right?
Yes.
And
The
then
last Republican.
right? That was all about promoting infrastructure, regulating business to a certain extent, to common sense ways. And it was about, providing a social safety net of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
That was the Republicans then. And then we had this tumultuous period in the 60s. What happened to America? What happened to, obviously there was, well, let me not give you my take. I'd love to hear your
take. Give me your take. Please give me your take. Give me your take.
Well, I see a lot of it as the whole civil rights movement and the fear of, I really, the further away from the US I get, the more I get it in a perspective, the more it seems that Americans are petrified of taxes. And anybody who is going to make them pay more taxes, or who is going to be construed as anti-business in any way,
convenience for America,
will get, that is not what we want. We want things to be easy for us. We want things to be not taxed. We don't want to have this mandate of trying to think collectively.
Yeah.
And there were some strong trends of that in the 60s, and everybody who stood for that got killed. Yes.
And beyond. Mm-hmm. Yes, Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, but, Anwar Sadat, Yitzhak Rabin, John Lennon,
JFK.
Jesus. Yeah. It's always, when you decide to challenge the status quo, the status quo will take it out on you. You don't really see that many conservatives being assassinated in most of history. A Caligula here and there, someone just incredibly cruel and evil, sure. But you don't really see, the system knocking off its own. And I'm against all violence, but, to your point, I think that's a large part of it. Eisenhower was the last Republican president to balance a budget and have a surplus in this country 70 years ago. And how did he do it? Well, progressive taxation, 90% rate on the wealthiest Americans. And guess what? They were paying incredibly high taxes, and they were still incredibly wealthy and better off than everyone else. Mm-hmm. Eisenhower had socialist programs like the Interstate Highway Plan, vast public works, which then put so many people to work and created so many more businesses across the country, like a bullet train program could do now in America. Eisenhower continued socialist programs like the GI Bill. That was a time when both political parties strongly supported labor unions, especially the Republican Party, strongly encouraged union membership. And you can trace the rise of the decline of unions with the decline of the middle class in this country. Whether you like them or not, they've always been the strongest voice working people have ever had. So when people say to me, oh, Eisenhower, the 50s were the good old days, I wasn't around for that, but I'm like, the same people who always call that the good old days don't want to do the policies Eisenhower did to make it the good old days. And of course, it wasn't good for women, people of color, LGBT. Of course it wasn't. But, in terms of the prosperity of the middle class, we could have that again in this country, but the system's been fixed ever since. JFK lowered it down to 70% for the top tax rate. And then under Ronald Reagan, it went down to 28%. And unemployment went so high that Reagan had to raise taxes 11 times. And we've been stuck in this 36 to 39% for the top earners for almost my whole life. But I think it's actually even more insidious than that. I write a lot about religion and Christianity. My mother is a former nun. My father was a Franciscan brother.
I read about that, and I got really scared because you were going to come on my podcast. I'm reading a brother and a sister get married about your parents. I'm thinking, oh my God, he's a product of incest or worse.
I know. Well, that's how NPR described it. Yeah. I got a lot of
Okay.
those jokes too. Yeah, brother, and also I'm the whitest guy in the world, but my mother's a sister, my father's a brother. Uh, I've been making fun of it my whole life. Um, but in terms of American Christianity, what folks around the world need to understand is that American Christianity has been replaced by evangelical anti-abortionism. When Roe versus Wade was made law of the land in the early 1970s, there was not a lot of controversy. Conservative judges agreed with it. It was not a big issue at the time.
What was promoted by conservatives?
It was. Well,
Yes.
it is I mean, there is a very strong conservative argument
Yes.
for abortion,
Yeah.
including a very strong conservative theological argument. If you believe in free will,
Mm.
then obviously you can't. I mean, it makes sense. As a Christian, I'm fascinated by it because there is no. You can make a Christian case against abortion, but the Bible's not against abortion. God says life begins with first breath in Genesis. In Book of Exodus, God makes it clear if you strike a pregnant woman and the fetus dies, you pay a fine. If you strike a pregnant woman and the woman dies, you pay with your life. So God establishes he does not put a woman and a fetus on the same level
Mm.
very early in the Bible. God drowns every fetus on earth one day with a flood. Maybe you've heard of Passover. God's the least pro-life character in the book, and Jesus never mentions it. Jesus was against the death penalty multiple times. But again, our pro-life people are really pro-some life. Most of them are big fans of killing the sinner.
Mm.
And so what they've done is the great achievement of the right wing in America over the last 40 years, and it explains so much of what's happened. They have managed to get, and again, how are you going to get people to vote for these tax cuts for the wealthy, right? I mean, you haven't had a Republican Party that's done anything for working people since Richard Nixon and the earned income tax credit. It's all been millionaires, 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 trickle down to you working people.
You too can be a millionaire.
I
That's
mean, if you have a 401k and it's doing great, that's
right,
wonderful.
right,
But most
right.
people don't have
You too.
401k.
If you work hard, you can be like the rich people.
Exactly. And I believe that, by the way. I do believe in the American dream. It's just that upward mobility is stalled,
Mm.
and it's stalled deliberately because of greed. We could have the American dream again. Deindustrialization and outsourcing and automation have all hurt it, but we could have it again. It's just they don't want to pay a living wage to American workers. I don't think Levi's should be allowed to have American flags in their ads after shipping all the jobs to sweatshops overseas. But what they did with abortion was how they got Americans to vote for all this. How do you get Christians to vote
Mm.
for pollution and war? How do you get Christians to vote for making the rich richer? Well, they used abortion to get followers of Jesus to vote against everything Jesus ever talked about by talking about abortion, which Jesus never talked about.
Mm.
I get accused a lot of saying that Jesus is pro-abortion. I'm not. What I'm saying is right-wing Christians have prioritized something Jesus never mentioned over all Christ actually did mention. And we're in a country now where you see millions of Christians voting for Donald Trump, for Caligula. I call them grab them by the pussy evangelicals, if you'll pardon me, because there is no part of Donald Trump that is reflected in the teachings of Jesus. There's no Christ-based argument for Trump. And even if you're an atheist, you can use this in an argument with a dumb American. There's no Christ-based argument to support Donald Trump. But anti-abortionism is what Christianity on the whole for the conservatives is now in America. It's all based on something Jesus never talked about, and it ignores everything he did talk about, which namely was Matthew 25, take care of the poor, take care of the sick, welcome the stranger, be kind to those in prison. Those are four things that Americans are opposed to. They're prayer against care. They don't want health care. They don't want their taxes to work for the poor because the poor are lazy. They do not want to welcome the stranger. This nation of immigrants is xenophobic and wants to keep immigrants out. And they really don't care about people in prison. Jesus overturns eye for an eye in the Sermon on the Mount, but it's the Christians who voted for the guy who brought back the federal death penalty last year. So it's a corrosive Christian hypocrisy in America that you have to understand. That goes back to the 1800s when they began having Bibles with illustrations and Americans were shown a white blonde Jesus. And that is why a certain strain of American Christianity has evolved along with white supremacy past slavery, past segregation, into where we are now. And that's why America is this Christian nation that is so ragingly against everything Christ talked about. And I see this proven true day after day. And so in my act, I make fun of it because in America, you know this, you're either an atheist or you're screaming at women outside clinics. These are the two options we're given. And I'm not religious, but I know lots of great religious people, and they're not reflected on TV. They're not interesting. Nice, moderate, liberal Christians, Muslims, and Jews getting along right now. Nice, but it doesn't get ratings. We need to see
No.
the assholes.
And that's it. It doesn't get promoted. It doesn't get talked
Yeah.
about.
It doesn't
And
get clicks. Doesn't get clicks. But a guy screaming at a woman outside a clinic, people will click on that, and that's what passes for spirituality in this country now.
I hope we get back to this thing with minority and the minority really ruling the majority, also with sensationalism, which is what we were just talking about. But I got to get a nugget in about this, because you're talking about abortion and the talking point of abortion. It used to be gay rights as well. They used that as well, but that's sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit. Can't really use it as much anymore. So now,
No, watch the Supreme Court. Watch the Supreme Court. They're going to be there. They may be rolling back
oh
LGBT
God, I
rights.
hope not. But it's another thing Jesus never talked about. You know, he never
Never once.
talked about.
Actually, he did, but I won't bore you. But actually, Jesus pretty much says gay men are born that way in Matthew 19. But that's a whole other matter. But it's something that I enjoy debating with these people.
Okay, so now I got to get that nugget too. So how
It's so boring. I mean, I can tell you. I mean, if you're ever debating a Christian homophobe, I mean, I'll make it quick. Matthew 19 is the passage that revoltingly fake Christians use to say that Christ would be against same-sex marriage, because that's where Jesus says, male and female, he made them. You know, man is meant to be with woman and marry. But context matters. And in the context of that, it's Jesus overturning the divorce laws of Moses. Because under Mosaic law, a man could kick his wife to the curb whenever he got tired of her. Jesus said, because your hearts were hardened, you did this. It's actually Jesus being a feminist. It's where Jesus says, if you look on a woman with lustful looks, you've already committed adultery. In other words, he's saying, don't sexually harass ladies, gentlemen. It's a rare, real feminist patch in a very anti-woman book. And then Jesus says, you know, look, male and female, he made them. Okay. And so when you marry a woman, you're meant to stay with her. Unless she commits adultery on you, you have to stay with your wife. So they have used something that is Jesus coming out against straight divorce to argue against gay marriage. And these people have voted for a guy who's been divorced twice and will be a third time. So, you know, there's that hypocrisy in it. But then Jesus immediately says, oh, by the way, there's three kinds of guys this rule doesn't apply to. The eunuchs. And this is the term in our English translations, but eunuch is a umbrella term for the three types of men Jesus says aren't going to get married. And again, everybody, don't take my word for this. Read it, Matthew 19, okay? It's what the homophobes use because they've never read it. It's against straight divorce. But then he says the three kinds of guys who are never going to get married, so these laws of marriage don't apply to them, are men who were born eunuchs, men who were made eunuchs by men, and men who have become eunuchs for the greater glory of God. Again, eunuch is a guy who's not going to be marrying a woman. So men who become eunuchs for the greater glory of God, they're celibate, they're spiritual, they become eunuchs. Men who've been made eunuchs by men, that's castration. And you just wouldn't assume in that society a castrated man was going to marry because he wasn't going to be able to have children. And then men who are born eunuchs, men who are born never interested in marrying women. Jesus lays it out, born this way.
Wow.
So there you go. Don't take my word for it. And again, I sound like a crazy Christian preacher, but I have found I go on TV and radio a lot. And for me, when I got away from religion and got into actually understanding the Bible, I came to really learn that I love Jesus. It's just, I view Jesus like I view Elvis. I love the guy, but his fan club's terrified. And the real Jesus was a peaceful, radical, nonviolent revolutionary who hung out with lepers and hookers and crooks, who never spoke English, was not an American citizen, was anti-capitalism, anti-wealth, anti-public prayer, Matthew 6:5, anti-public prayer, completely anti-death penalty, never once anti-gay, never once mentioned abortion, never once technically came out against premarital sex, never called poor people lazy, never fought for tax cuts from the wealthiest Nazarenes, never tried to say torture was okay, never thought of ways to keep immigrants out, never mentioned borders, and was a long-haired, brown-skinned, that's in Revelation, brown-skinned, homeless, Middle Eastern, unarmed, community organizing, anti-slut shaming, Palestinian, liberal, homeless Jew. That's the guy.
Let's bring him back. I'm
just a big fan of, like, The thing I like about Jesus is calling out hypocrites. He teaches you how to
Right.
call out these religious hypocrites, and America is overrun with them. And I'm sorry to belabor the point so much, but to understand America, you have to understand this mutated, hypocritical, toxic form of Christianity that has gotten into the hearts of a lot of good people and made them vote against the very guy they pray to.
They are doing it out of the very best of intentions. They have just been raised with it. You know,
Some of them, yeah.
this is, and it's another part of, about being part of the group, and that being more important than actually dissecting and think critically and actually understand what it is you are
I agree.
bonding together about, right?
I agree.
But I just want to get this nugget about abortion, because I think it's one of those things that I find really interesting. If you look at the statistics for Catholic countries in South America,
Yes.
which is pretty much all of them, they have the highest rates of abortion anywhere, and it's illegal.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? Like,
So
abortion has always been around. Abortion's in
yes,
the Bible. It's in the Bible.
absolutely.
In Numbers 5, God gives you abortion tips for pregnant, unfaithful wives. It's there. God tells you to take your wife to the priest, and the priest makes her drink a concoction. And if your wife is pregnant by another man, her belly will swell, her thigh will rot, her issue will come forth, and she will be barren. You mutilate a woman and you terminate the pregnancy. Again, I didn't write it. So that is totally at the heart of so much of it.
Ancient Egypt, same thing. I mean, this
right.
is something that has just been a part of human history.
Yeah.
So,
And it's not going to end if America makes it illegal next year.
oh
They
gosh.
might.
So,
I mean,
so no, and
still
but that's again, I guess it plays to the hypocrisy. If we say we make it illegal, therefore now it won't happen. But it
yeah.
actually just happens at the same rate, but
Correct.
it's now a dangerous practice.
Well, yeah,
And
they'll never end abortion. They will end the safe, legal, regulated abortions.
Right.
That's the only thing they have the power to end. And again, we don't have an abortion problem. We have an unwanted pregnancy problem.
Right.
With an abortion symptom. But these people also believe the Bible's against birth control, which it's not.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it's like, this is America. We are locked between the 1800s and the 2000s. We are still having this moral struggle between a 19th century mentality in the 21st century. And when there's low voter turnout, you will see a charlatan, racist, con man, fraud, incompetent like Trump get all this power, because all he had to do was say that he was opposed to abortion and wanted to make it illegal. And 62 million people who put up a tree in their house at Christmas time voted for Caligula. That's it.
Do you think it's something to do with how Americans are raised? Because I've noticed that from anywhere from high school to many different places, even calling the IRS, there's a very authoritarian, very sort of right or wrong way of doing things. Critical thinking is not really encouraged. There's not really a way where we talk about things. It's either, no, you're stupid if you don't understand how things are. There seems to be just this very, I don't know what you'd call that, but a very tight way of regarding one another that is not very forgiving.
Correct. I agree. I grew up. Well, I grew up with a father from Brooklyn, New York, and my mother was from the South. So I would hear all about rednecks all the time where I lived, the disparagement of Southern people. And then I'd go down south with my family down there and spend the summers, and I'd be called a Yankee and hear all about the Yankees. And so I had a front row seat as a child to how Americans are culturally encouraged to hate each other. Yeah, it's a great metaphor for all humans, right? I mean, we are called the United States, but in many ways we are the divided tribes of America. And, I think a lot of people overcome it. I think a lot of people grow, they become better. But there's a real seductive lure to telling people at a very young age that what you feel right now is exactly right and you don't need to change. And when you look at Donald Trump, who is very much an adolescent, if not a toddler, you understand that lure of like not having to learn to compromise, not having to learn to respect. when I hear someone say, you know, oh, my granddad, he's never going to understand trans rights. Grandpappy's set in his ways. And I'm like, okay, Grandpappy's set. You ever hear this? He's so old and set in his ways. And what I hear is, so you're saying he's an old man and he lived through the civil rights struggle, lived through Vietnam, lived through women struggling for equality, lived through the LGBT people struggling for equality, and he learned absolutely nothing. He didn't grow a bit. You know, people talk about our presidential race as the two old white guys, and that's true. But it's the two most interestingly different kinds of white guys you can have. The one, the old white guy, who has grown, who has learned, who has evolved, who has become better, who has faced his own prejudices of his past and tried to be a better person as he's gotten older. And the old white guy whose opinions and morals have not shifted since the 1970s and thinks that learning is weakness, growth is weakness, and there is no need to be superior to your former self because your former self was awesome. It's the other who are the problem. And that's the real choice we're given. And to me, it's like, it's much more broad than two old white guys.
You know, I saw a really, or heard an interesting podcast actually with Brené Brown. Do you know her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love her. Love her.
Yeah, and she was interviewing Joe Biden, and she prefaced the interview by her talk about in her social science work, she has these different concepts about power. There's power over, which is the authoritarian way of thinking, and then there is power with, and power to, and power within. And where she would mention and what the research shows about power over, how it manifests, and it was, of course, totally Donald Trump. It's this, nope, it is the way I say because that's how I say it is, and that's how it is. And so you have to just do it. And the power to and power with obviously is much more collaborative. And I want to understand, I want to communicate, I want to be a fair leader. I want to lead by example, all those things.
Yes, I think you're exactly right. I mean, that's what a leader is. And we don't have a leader in this country. We have a boss. And
Yes.
I think, and really the heroes are young people for smelling that and understanding it and not being as deceived in the same numbers. I saw an amazing statistic yesterday from a poll that showed that among white men without a college education, Trump is, they support Trump 67%. Everybody else that's not a white guy with no college, everybody else supports Biden 60%. Critical thinking is not taught here because, as George Carlin says, America doesn't want critical thinkers. America wants consumers, mindless consumers who buy stuff and do as they're told. And as you know, it's very easy to manipulate a certain kind of American man and woman with babies, flags, the Bible, and the troops. Those four things will make Americans vote for policies that hurt babies, that hurt our military, that are a disgrace to our legacy, and that go against the teachings of the Bible. It's just all propaganda, and we see it playing out in America in very clear ways. But you know, around the world too. I mean, America is in many ways the world, the best and worst that we have to offer.
I grew up, you know, with this fear of America. I grew up with fear of the USSR, and I grew up with fear of America because those were the two superpowers that threatened to create a situation that would be fought out, battled out right over our heads in Europe and Denmark.
Yeah.
I feared both sides tremendously.
Yeah.
But there was always a fascination with America for its indulgence, for its edginess. It's there was always, they said things, they did things in really provoking ways that we were really fascinated with. So it was this love-hate relationship.
Yeah. Well, I mean, America, people around the world have despised America's governments and policies, but they've loved our culture. They've loved our movies and our sports and our rap music and our rock and roll. I mean, our TV shows. So, you know, that's another which I'm comfortable with. I like our culture more than I like our governments too. I remember being a kid and, you know, this Cold War stuff. I was still alive for some of that. And, you know, I remember seeing all these movies as a kid where the Russians were the bad guys, like Red Dawn, or Clint Eastwood's Firefox or Raise the Titanic, where the Russians are these ridiculous bad guys. And I remember being a child being like, why are you doing this? They're never going to want to be our friends if you keep making them the bad guys in all these bad movies. What, we should be making movies where Russians are our friends. That was how I reacted to it as a kid. I didn't understand it. And now that I'm older, I love the Russian people and I despise their government. So, you know, I get it. This is how it works. We, the people, are the real leaders. And all true change has always come from people, not from leaders. It's always been the people leading.
So that is the future. That is what those young people that you were talking about, and women and the people of color, they see it. They know it.
Time to be alive. It's an amazing time to watch the ugliest, meanest, most selfish, white supremacist part of the 20th century. And when I say white supremacists, I don't mean race haters. White supremacists are not Klansmen who hate minorities. White supremacists are, in America, they're mostly people who think, well, everyone's great. I love everyone, but as long as we're on top, we're all cool. Okay. We're the majority. You guys are great, you minorities, but we're on top. That's white supremacy. That's what it celebrates. You know, and we have a and people don't realize it. Donald Trump was saying, you know, he said, oh, they were in Charlottesville with that Unite the Right rally with all those bigots and racists and Klansmen and Nazis, and killed that poor woman. And he said they were very fine people on both sides, and people got outraged over that. And all the Republicans corrected it, saying he wasn't saying the Klansmen and the Nazis were very fine people. He just meant the marchers, the peaceful marchers. But those peaceful marchers were marching to defend Confederacy monuments. The peaceful marchers were literally marching to preserve monuments to white supremacy. That's how much we don't get it in this country. We don't even see what we're doing.
I think you're right about that. It is denied. It is under the surface. It is not talked about. And I think it's been there for the duration. You know, it's built in with slavery and with the concepts that come from the mindset of being a Herrenvolk, you know, being the ones that lead by intimidation.
You're right. Yeah. And again, most of us are blind to it. Donald Trump launched his Republican political career with a racist smear that the first Black president wasn't born here.
Right.
No evidence, said it for years. And to me, you know, the very fact that our media never asks him about it shows how the racism is baked into our culture. I mean, he came out in September of 2016 and said, Barack Obama was really born here. I forced him to show the birth certificate. You know, first guy in history to like brag that another guy had to prove he was a liar. But like, no one's ever had to answer for it. And you ask people, you know, people say he's not a racist. And I say, where was Barack Obama born? And I'm telling you, try this with trolls who say Trump's not a racist. Anyone watching, just say, where was Barack Obama born? And watch them say, I don't know where he was born. He claims he was born in Hawaii. It doesn't matter. They bend themselves into pretzels because the racist lie matters more to their hearts than the truth. But people still don't see that as racism. They just see it as a lie. They don't see it as institutionalized. That because he had a funny name, well, gee, even though there's no evidence, maybe there really is an argument that he wasn't born here. This is the last 10 years. And the very fact that we're still debating the treason flag of the Confederates that took up arms against America to preserve the monstrosity of slavery shows that we still don't take slavery seriously in this country. And that, along with the ethnic cleansing of the indigenous people, are America's two original sins. And America is not going to start to heal until it faces the truth. Love doesn't hide from the truth. Love faces the unpleasant realities and grows from it. And America still needs to do that. One
of the things I've had so much respect for Germany for doing is precisely that.
Yes, I agree.
Their whole decade of the 50s and 60s, they were doing a lot of denial and let's not talk about, and let's just get on with it.
Yep.
And then
the children of those people grew up and took over, and they were embarrassed by it.
They started unpacking it, and they started really unpacking it. And now when you go there are museum after museum after museum where they not only are telling the story of their country and what happened, but they are trying to really tell the story of authoritarianism and the dangers and the warning signs and what can happen if we're not awake to it.
Yeah.
So they've really transformed their wound into a gift, I think, to those who visit. And
You're,
I hope America will get there too, because once, I mean, the fascination with the U.S. is not gone. The world still is mad about the U.S. in
oh
so
yeah,
many ways, right?
yeah,
Particularly, as you say, the people, the African Americans, the music that came out of their torment and suffering, but how they transformed it into music and art and culture.
yeah.
That is what really carries, to me anyway. That's
Too.
what carries American culture.
Look, I mean,
So
look, that's hip hop and that's country music, both
mm,
born out of poverty, uniquely American art forms that wound up making people around the world feel like they had a better sense of America. And they're two such different art forms, yet they're both cousins of the blues.
right, absolutely. And it tells it like it is. It puts it out there. It's authentic in the best way. It's not
Yes,
the telling it like it is that is an intimidation, which certain
correct.
political leaders use it as.
Well, that's what artists do, right? Artists tell the truth in ways that are entertaining. And, for me as a comedian, I mean, in doing political humor, I get a lot of enemies and, threats and meanness. But
Mm.
Billy Wilder once said, if you're going to tell people the truth, make it funny or they'll kill you. And I think, you can also just make it entertaining or they'll kill you as well, because people are scared of the truth. So you got to find a way to wrap it up nicely.
Or just be real
Yeah,
and heart to heart, right?
you're
So
more eloquent than me. Yes.
I wanted to go around that because you say sometimes in interviews that it was George Carlin and his comedy that made you feel less alone. I'd love to understand how his comedy and how his art hit you in that place, because it's funny, it's sarcastic, it's all kinds of things, and you're saying it made you feel less alone.
I think for most of us at some point in our life, if we're lucky, an artist can do that. And it may be a novel, it may be a painting, it may be an album. And we've all had that in different ways. I mean, Bob Dylan makes me feel less alone. Shakespeare makes me feel less alone. Joni Mitchell makes me feel less alone. But when I was young, we were going through the first Persian Gulf War, not not the Iraq invasion, but when Bush Sr. Sent our troops overseas to restore the dictator of Kuwait,
Mm,
Operation Desert Storm.
mm,
Kuwait, a country where women have no rights and are legal property. And we sent troops over to drive Saddam Hussein out of there. We told Saddam Hussein we had no opinion on his border dispute. We let him invade. And then we went over there to bring freedom to the Kuwaitis, where women are legal property. And it was a time when it was a war made for TV. It was when Bush, the president, said, we have exorcised the ghosts of Vietnam. He was literally saying we can feel good about war again.
oh
The
god.
war had 93% approval. Whitney Houston lip synced the national anthem in a football stadium, and it was released as a single. America was gripped with a jingoistic fervor that was insane. There was not, like the Iraq War, the dissent we saw. In the Iraq War, the majority of the world was against it.
Mm.
This, 93% of Americans were for it. At the victory parade, there was a group of clergy that were praying silently in protest, and the crowd around them began chanting, assholes, assholes, assholes. It was a real smack in the face for me of the ugliness of America. And my friends had said, hey, man, we're going to go see George Carlin live. And I had seen him on HBO. I knew his comedy. I knew the dirty words. And, I said, okay, I'll come have a laugh. And it was for an album that was called Jammin' in New York. And Carlin always said that was the album where he stopped being a comedian and became an essayist. And it began with Carlin entering the stage, and his first 15 minutes was a scathing denunciation of that incredibly popular war. Tore it apart. If you listen to the album Jammin' in New York, you'll have it opens with the same set, and it will give you a small sense of the shock I felt that someone was speaking what I felt in my heart and what I was called a traitor for. I mean, I had coworkers who were mean to me because I didn't see why we were doing this. I thought the whole thing was corrupt. It's one thing to restore Kuwait, but this is happening in Africa. We don't go where there's no oil to help the people. And half the American troops died of friendly fire. It was just corrupt to the bone. And it was done for Bush to get a second election. And it was just, I could see it. I was 20 years old and I could see it. And everyone was just abusive to me for it. And Carlin walks on stage and does this scathing piece about the corruption of it and the dishonesty of it. And I sat in the audience and I felt like I was having a religious experience that I've had a few times as an audience member, of just thinking, wow, I'm not alone. This guy has taken what I feel and given voice to it. And so anytime I ever get that kind of compliment from someone, it's lovely to me, because that's what art can do. You know, that's what a good writer can do. And so yeah, I recommend that album, Jammin', and it's like 30 years old this year, but I recommend it to everyone. It's very powerful.
So was that being met in a place where you had felt marginalized, but somebody else was speaking truth, speaking
Yes.
authentically,
Yeah, exactly.
there it is again, that telling it like it is, that complete.
But also in an entertaining way. It wasn't propaganda. You know what I mean? Like you can tell people what you want them to know, but they're either going to take it as propaganda or a sermon, or how, like, I'm not a good enough speaker to do that. I have to try to put jokes in it, to try to convey, because I think a joke is a very powerful delivery system for truth. If there's no truth to a joke, no one laughs.
Mm.
So if you can make someone laugh, you can make them trust you. And I find in that sense, it's why people in my country trust comedians more than they trust journalists or politicians, because they tell it like it is.
So what is good art?
Uh, Duke Ellington was asked about music, and he said, if it sounds good, it is. So, you know, what I liked as a child, the kind of TV shows I liked as a child, or films, or books, I look at as crude and, you know, embarrassing now. But what they did for my heart and mind as a child was genuine. So whatever somebody feels, I don't care if it's Benny Hill show. If it's what speaks to you, great. Just, you
Mm.
know, I like it when people keep searching for different kinds of art. I don't know. What do you think is good art?
Well, I think that's an important point, that it can change. You can have an interpretation of something that speaks to you, and that is that revelatory experience that just does something to you that you can feel.
Yeah.
And then next time you hear it, it's different. It's one of the things actually I found in my research about blues fans, that music is very dependent on outside circumstances, how it hits you, what hits you so strongly right after your divorce or right after you walk out of a funeral.
Yeah.
You don't respond to the same way. So there's a real reciprocal relationship. And therefore,
Yeah.
I think it is really ridiculous sometimes to talk about good art or a definition or something because it is a synthesis between the receiver and the sender.
You're right. You're right.
But I also think there's another point, and this is something I struggle with a good deal, which is in America, I find a expectation that if art is good, it needs to be commercially viable.
Yes.
If it's not, then it can't have any, it's not good quality. And nothing could be further.
Commercial quality. Yeah. I mean, Van Gogh sold 3 paintings in his lifetime, right?
Right. But then he became huge. So he was obviously redeemed. And then he
Yeah.
became commercially successful. And although he was dead.
He died a failure. He died a failure. Only his brother believed in him. And it's
Sure.
like,
Sure.
that's the age old story of the poet who dies in the gutter and is later recognized as
But
a
I
genius.
have these discussions with people in America where they go, well, if you can't make money as an artist, you're not any good. And they are literally, that's what they're saying.
But no
And
art, does artists talk that way? Or are
no,
these just, yeah.
no. But, and then I have the other side over here where there's this expectation that art can improve the life experience of a citizenry, and therefore it needs to be also nurtured and supported. And since we don't have the rich men necessarily, or women, that support the arts like we had in the 1700s or whatever, we have these state funded events and grants and things that really try to give a diversity to an artistic expression.
Yes, I agree.
And I find that so missing in the States.
I agree. It's not valued. It's not valued any more than, you know, the actual teachings of Jesus are valued. You know, it's like, does this create jobs? Well, you know, that's how we measure a value of things. But again, that's a metaphor for the whole human experience. You know, that's always that kind of struggle to appreciate the beauty amidst the trash. Every culture has a version of that, and in America, it's just a lot louder and gaudier. But then I see all the good art that's produced here, and then I see, in many ways, uh, I wish this country made it easier for a person to make a living as an artist. I really do. But many people have to have the commercial job to subsidize the creative job they want to do. I once spent a year doing a terrible cable TV talk show in Hollywood so I could do a off-Broadway solo show in New York. And I would be in LA 5 days a week. I mean, I'd be in New York 6 days a week. On Mondays, I'd fly in the morning to Burbank, do my show, fly right back.
Right.
And that's the balance, I think, that between the commerce and art that a lot of people just have to hustle and discover for themselves.
Yes, and there is some suffering that also births art, and
Yes.
sometimes that is a part of it. So, like the final question, we got to go.
Yes, thank you.
You mentioned Bob Dylan, and I got his last album recently, and I listened, and then I think his very first song, "I Contain Multitudes."
Yes.
Isn't that it? I mean, that's it.
That's it.
And that's where we're going. We contain multitudes.
That's Whitman. That's Walt Whitman. I mean, Bob has a lot. Bob name checks a lot of great art on this record. But yeah, well, in Leaves of Grass, Whitman says it, and Dylan just took that one line and shows so much of art is repurposing. He took a line of Whitman and wrote a whole song around it and made it his own.
And gave me so much hope because we all contain multitudes.
That record is one of the pieces of art that got me through this terrible year of plague and election in America. That song Key West on that album, the penultimate song, is one of those magical long Bob Dylan songs that is telling you the secrets of the universe, but you've got to figure out in your soul without words what it means. And it's so nice to have an artist like that who has gone 8 years now without releasing an album of new music, 5 albums of Sinatra covers, but 8 years. And to have one of our finest artists at age 79 put out a redefining work shows me that none of us are ever done in how we want to express ourselves, and that we can find new ways to reinvent ourselves as we change through life, because we contain multitudes.
We do indeed. Famous closing words. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast, John.
But thank you so much for having me. It's really, really delightful. As a Dane who's never been to Denmark, I thank you for this experience.